Now, before I begin, you must have a certain level of intelligence for you to understand this review. Yo guys, what's up? My name is Deja Vu the ITK. Here again with another album review. Today we are talking about J. Cole's latest album, For Your Eyez Only. Now, J. Cole, as I'm sure a lot of you would know, he went triple platinum with no features on his last album, 2014 Forest Hills Drives. I did a comparison of his previous two albums, Born Sinner and Forest Hills Drives. Be sure to check that out at the end of this video. But yeah, he's come again with, you could say, a surprise album, even though a lot of people were, eagerly anticipating this album, trying to find out, will he go platinum again with no features? Now, again, on this album, For Your Eyez Only, there are no notable features. Of course, he has artists providing backing vocals, but there are, no side-by-side features on this album. So it's pretty much J. Cole handling a large majority of the production, handling a lot of the singing, and also rapping. Now, For Your Eyez Only is a conceptual album that tells the story of James McMillan Jr. as well as kind of telling the story of J. Cole as well. And this story is told through James's eyes as well as J. Cole's eyes, and it is for his daughter's eyes only. A lot of eyes there, I know, but that's basically the concept. And there's a lot of content on this album, so forgive me if I don't talk about every single thing that was mentioned and discussed and every single topic, because there are a lot of things that J. Cole said on this album. So that being said, if you love this album or love J. Cole and will not appreciate if I offer some criticism to this album, I'd say it's best you click off this video. So the album is 10 tracks long and runs for about 44 minutes, and it opens with a track, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Basically this is sort of like a track talking about, usually when church bells toll, it's a signal of a funeral, and J. Cole is telling the story of James from his own perspective. It's sort of like a premonition of his death and his burial, from, you could say, a third person's perspective. He's saying you can see the rain pouring down, and the bells are getting louder, like death keeps on calling him, and it's getting louder and louder and louder. It has some very jazzy production. The next track, Immortal, again, it's just expressing the experiences of being on the streets and how, real niggas don't die despite being dead. You always be remembered. And it kind of takes a turn from talking about the streets and talking about this perspective of James. In the second part of this song, it now goes to talk on, J. Cole takes a more personal, hold of this track and starts, I think, speaking on certain bitterness he might have about the perception of him as an artist or as an individual. So he says, would he die young and live forever as a legend, or should he live longer and, not really have a fulfilled life? And he talks about how even though while you're living they don't respect you as a legend, but when you're dead everybody starts really listening and understanding your message more. So I think that's the kind of these thoughts of death that J. Cole keeps, referencing and toying about with. I will say that this shows like I said, the bitterness that J. Cole might have about how people see him as an individual. Perhaps, people saying that he's corny or that, they don't relate to his music. Maybe they'll get it once he's dead. The next track, Deja Vu, this track is surrounded by a bit of controversy. You've had producers, going at it, Twitter wars, over the past week. The producers in question here are Vinyls and Boy Wonder, as well as another producer by the name of Foreign Tech. And if you've listened to Bryson Tiller's Exchange, you'd be able to understand that these two tracks are very similar. They use the same sample. Now, it's not that big a deal. You're using the same sample. Vinyls and Boy Wonder alleged that Foreign Tech had heard this instrumental and had stolen it and given it to Bryson Tiller, who then released the song before J. Cole did. But because J. Cole had recorded this particular song, Deja Vu, before Bryson Tiller had even recorded his version and blah, 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 blah. Another producer coming in and saying, no, I created the beat first. Like, there's a lot of controversy that I feel could have been avoided if J. Cole had simply left out this album. But it seems like he's been in such a reclusive state that he's probably not aware of how big Exchange is, or probably didn't see a problem with releasing this track. I feel like it should have just been left out. Next track, Vile Mentality. Basically, on this track, J. Cole laments how people always call him when they want something, but eventually one day he's going to disappear. Now, this disappear could mean him literally disappearing, as he said on the track, maybe he might run away to a foreign location, as people who are, ducking certain cases have done, or maybe he might just die or fade away completely from the scene, as he is sure, and as J. Cole himself understands it, his relevance in the music industry or the hip-hop industry is not guaranteed. One day you're in and the next day you're out. And he also says, people might call it running away, but he sees it as escaping. This is the first time we have James's daughter's perspective on this album. And she's basically saying, how when her father passed away, the effects it had on her and her mom, how her mom is mean to her, and how she misses her dad. On this track, and throughout this album, you feel like certain elements of the production were inspired by To Pimp a Butterfly, especially with the violins. I don't know, there's something about the violin chords that really reminds me of To Pimp a Butterfly. Another thing on here is that I would say it is a very jazzy production. I really love the bass of this track. Also, J. Cole does some singing. The singing is another problem I've had with this album. I feel as though this whole no features thing has sort of become gimmicky to J. Cole, and it ruined the quality of this album. And I'll get into that a bit later. But the next track is She's Mine Part 1. And he basically says, to catch him, this is the first time he's falling in love, maybe falling in love with his significant other. And, basically the admiration of a woman. Very slow and somber production. I think the production was ruined by J. Cole's singing, where the production starts very smooth, very enjoyable, and then you just hear this singing from J. Cole where he's just like, I never felt so alive, and it's just really, bad. I don't know, it was just really bad and it ruined the track for me. The next track, Change, he's saying, at this point, he's no longer scared. If God really exists, he doesn't think that he's going to judge him because he understands the ignorance that comes with killing another man. He also talks about how change comes from within. The next track, Neighbors. Now, this track, sort of talks about stereotypes, living in a white man's world. And on this track, while J. Cole does something I think is quite interesting, he contrasts being very popular, successful, and living in an affluent neighborhood with being very simple and humble. He says on this track, he's living in a white man's area or white man's world. He has a lot of money, but the money and the area he's in and him being a black man, and maybe just his appearance makes his neighbors think that he's selling dope, him and his friends are selling dope. That despite the fact that he has numerous plaques in his house and the fact that, the president himself listens to his music, he's still seen as a potential drug dealer. A sentiment which is carried along by a lot of, black entertainers. He also talks about not having rap cars in his garage, but just having something simple to get him back and forth. He also says, when he meets or when he met the president, he doesn't want to talk about, just taking pictures. He wants to talk about real issues. This would perhaps be my most enjoyable track. I enjoyed J. Cole's delivery on this track, and the production was quite good. I love the bass on this track as well. The next track, Folding Clothes, I'd say this is perhaps the most controversial or the most noted track because of the simplicity of what he's talking about. But I think it is because of this simplicity that people maybe overlook or just intentionally overlook the message behind this track, I don't think it's as corny as people are saying. You know, they're like, oh, he's so corny, he wants to fold clothes. Like, basically he's just saying, you know, let me do something for you to make your life easier as you make my life easier on a daily basis, just, you know, to show you care. And I don't think that's a bad thing, maybe because of the way he worded it. But even at that, I think he got his message across, because folding clothes, doing laundry is not an easy task. And, you know, just helping your lady out, showing appreciation and you care, is something that is important. And I think the ladies will enjoy and appreciate this track. I think it's an okay track. The next track, She's Mine Part 2. This is like a sequel to the Part 1 earlier, and I think on this track he's talking about his daughter. Is it J. Cole's daughter or is it James' daughter? I think it's both. I think it's just a song for anyone who has a newborn child or a newborn daughter. You know, like the love and the affection and that connection you have when your daughter or your child is born, that, you know, falling in love all over again. And then he also talks about if he could wish away, or if he could get rid of all evil things, he would get rid of Santa Claus, because it's something that is peddled by evil corporations to make you spend unnecessary money then on things you don't buy and get you into more debt while they make more money. Now, while I understand and agree with what he's saying, the way he says it is going to be a bit turn-off-ish for a lot of his listeners. Now, not his traditional listeners, but listeners that he might be marketing to in general. The final track, and I would say perhaps the most loaded track and the title track, For Your Eyez Only. This is like a summary, and I think it is at this point that most people understand the whole point of this album. Basically, on this track, you have J. Cole and James giving their perspective. James talks about his life, living on the streets, the struggle he's faced, the perception of being a real nigger. James on this track, or J. Cole's as James, you know, has this perception of whether his daughter hates him, is spiteful of him. Maybe she'll just go up and, you know, find a person who's exactly like him, because life is cyclical. And he also says, you know, he didn't grow up with the father, so perhaps she, not growing up with the father, will also go and look for another person who was just like him. But he hopes that she doesn't, and she finds someone who has a wider point of view than outside of his block, and hopes that he is still alive to see his daughter, and, you know, be there for her, so perhaps she won't have to listen to this album. But if she is indeed listening to this album, then he is dead. He also talks about how J. Cole, had, you know, given him a home, how J. Cole had also tried to take him away from the street life. Now J. Cole then comes in to talk about, you know, her dad, and how he had called him and said, you know, he's having premonitions of his death. He's seeing his death coming. So in case he doesn't make it through, here's my story, write it down and deliver this message to my daughter, in case I don't make it to deliver it personally. And it is for her eyes only. And I think that's why in the album cover, J. Cole is seen with his back to the camera, you know, for her eyes only. Only she can see it. Now, I think this persona of James, a lot of people are speculating, is it a real person? You know, is it a story? And, you know, at the end, J. Cole also says this is a dedication to all the people affected by mass incarceration. This is for her eyes only. And that her father was a real nigger, not because he was cold or because he had sex at 16, but because he loved her very much. Now, this persona of James, I think it's an alter ego of J. Cole. Honestly, I'm a little bit worried for J. Cole, because he toys with this perception of death, and around death you have a lot of different thoughts. And I think one thought would be, you know, what would my life be if I had gone on the streets? And, you know, even with the birth of his daughter, what would his life have been if he had, you know, gone and been a street nigger and sold dope or whatever? Would he have been killed in the streets? And as such, does he need to embody this persona to see the world in a different perspective. Now, probably he is drawing from, anecdotes, and he is drawing from his own experiences and what he's been told. But I think, listening to this, I think James is an alter ego of Jermaine, and him thinking, if I had taken this route in life, maybe this is how I would have ended up. Now, with that being said, and I will say this album sounds uninspiring to me. It sounds like J. Cole is done. It sounds like J. Cole is tired. It sounds like J. Cole it feels like he's giving up. It feels like he's done. He has nothing more to offer. That's the perception I get listening to this album. Now, that drains a lot of enjoyability, especially sonically with this album. It feels very lazy. I know a lot of people will come at me and disagree with me, but for a second, just consider that this album wasn't created by J. Cole. Say it was just created by a SoundCloud rapper, you just stumble across this CD and give it a listen once. Would you really be as lenient to this album if it wasn't from J. Cole? And your answer would probably be no, if you were to be very honest, because the singing was poor in my opinion. And even though he articulated the rawness and the emotion better just being on his own, musically it would have been better to get someone who was a better singer. It didn't have to be many features. It could have just been a recurrent feature throughout the album. Also, while the production is okay, it doesn't do anything groundbreaking. It feels sort of like a copy-paste of To Pimp a Butterfly. With that being said, I will say there's a lot to really sink in and listen to on this album. While I don't agree that one listen reviews are destroying hip-hop according to J. Cole, and I'll make a video especially dedicated to that, I think that you do need to sit with this album for a period of time. You need to listen to it a few times and get all the message and form your own opinion. Personally, I think this album sits at about a 5.5, maybe a 6/10. And it sits there not because of the musical components, it sits there because of the message and all what is being said. I would have preferred if this had even been a spoken word, rather than having the musical component, because the music to me is what really destroyed this album. It wasn't a very appealing listen musically. However, the messaging and the rawness and the emotion, while it is lacking a lot in some parts, was definitely interesting to listen to. That being said, J. Cole, again, I think he sometimes overemphasizes on his own importance, and he tends to talk about problems that we already know instead of, being someone that sees yourself as a leader of this generation. You should instead prefer more solutions than you do highlight the problems. And when you do prefer those solutions, do not sound sanctimonious, because a lot of times people will listen to this and be like, he's talking like he's perfect. So, those are my thoughts. You're welcome to disagree with me. You're welcome to give your own criticisms and your own opinions on this album, as long as you keep it civil. I don't mind. And, do not be surprised if this is J. Cole's last album, the last album that he does himself. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. My name is Deja Vu. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like. If you're new around here, why not click subscribe? Be sure to check my comparison of Forest Hills Drive and Born Sinner, some of my other reviews on this channel. There's a lot of content on here, and have a blessed day.